Delighted to hand over to Dr. Kate Sollis from University of Tasmania. For the record, University of Tasmania, and also the president of the Bega Valley Data Collective, and excited for you to be able to hold the space here with this group. Kate, over to you. Under the chair on the other side, we have a...
Thanks so much, Simon, for the introduction, and it feels like a real honour to be chairing this very final session or panel discussion at the conference. Before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge that we're all meeting on Indigenous lands today, the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay respects to elders past and present. And especially with the discussion that we're about to have, it's really important to note that Indigenous peoples throughout this land lived well on country for many tens of thousands of years. So, living well with nature, challenges in law, policy and behavioural change. I feel like this topic has been interwoven a little bit throughout this conference. And what really struck me at the very beginning of day one was Lorenzo's keynote speech, where he mentioned that we spend more money as a planet exploring outside our Earth than we do on conserving the planet we have. And I think that's a really pertinent point. And I think that as a society, we need to learn to live better with nature and take care of nature. And I'm really excited to hear from these three amazing and inspirational speakers about their thoughts on how we can go about doing that. So without further ado, I would like to firstly introduce Pastor Uncle Ray Minniecon. He's an Indigenous elder statesman and a descendant of the Kabi Kabi Nation and the Gurung Gurung Nation of Southeast Queensland, along with the South Sea Islander people from Ambram land. So Uncle Ray, I invite you to come up and give a 5 to 10 minute provocation for each speaker, and then we'll have quite a lot of time for a Q&A.
Thanks, and thanks for that acknowledgement of country. I'm from the Kabi Kabi people, as mentioned there, and I will walk gently on the country of the Ngunnawal people here too. And to Monash University, thank you for the opportunity to speak here at this incredibly powerful and important discussion here in Canberra. And also thank you for the invitation for us Indigenous peoples. We do have a voice, and our voice does matter, and thank you for that. And before I deliver what I want to deliver, I just wanted to also explain or try to give some kind of Aboriginal wisdom on how we approach a lot of these things, because one of the challenges I think for Indigenous peoples is that we're working on this one issue, but we're working in a lot of silos and departments or compartments, and sometimes we don't bring it all together and talk about it enough. But in Aboriginal ways of thinking, you know, before an Aboriginal child reaches the age of 12, they already have a PhD in environmental science, in astronomy, in a whole range of other things. And so it's a difficult challenge for us to look at these issues through those particular silos that we have. And I've been to a number of COPs. I'm going to, what's that place called? Brazil shortly, next month, to talk about these issues again. But in order for me to talk to you this morning, I thought I'd do something completely radical, something completely different. So I wrote a letter to my great-great-grandson about these issues. And if you have children or grandchildren or great-great-grandchildren, what would you say to them about our current issues? The only regret I have, or maybe it's not a regret, is that he can't write a letter back to me yet. What would he say? But this is my letter to him. His name is Hassan. Can we put his photograph up? These two photographs here are of my great-great-grandson, Hassan, looking at the big world and looking at the little blue dot. Hassan, my beloved grandson, your birth has awakened within me a deep love for you and a deepening responsibility and a renewed sense of purpose in my life. You have lit a new fire within my passions and aspirations to fight for our fragile earth with this uncertain future for you and all humankind. Hassan, you come from such a unique heritage. Aboriginal, Torres Strait, Ambrym Island, Borneo, and each of these ancient heritages are under increasing threats to climate change. Son, we have a problem. So I write to you to try to explain our current climate change crisis. Let me try to explain what I mean. Climate change means our Earth is getting too hot and out of balance because people have been putting too many bad gases into the air called CO2 or carbon dioxide. It is a non-flammable, colourless and odourless gas composed of one carbon atom and two oxygen atoms. It's called a greenhouse gas, essential for the Earth's natural warmth. Now, these gases make a blanket around the Earth that traps too much heat because we humans are burning things like coal and oil and other harmful activities. Now, what happens is it causes the weather to act strange, more uncontrollable floods, coastal erosions, fires and storms. They happen far too quickly and regularly. Now, our old people always said that the earth is alive. She breathes, she feels, she talks to us through the wind, the oceans, the rain and the animals. They taught us that when we heal country, country will heal all of us. When we don't listen, when we take too much or hurt the land, the earth gets sick. That's what we call the climate change crisis, when the earth is crying out for help. It means we all have to work together now to care for country again. Plant trees, use clean energy, waste less, and show respect for the balance that keeps everything alive. When we look after the land looks after us. That's what our ancestors always taught us. They said that the health of the land is the health of the people. So to help you understand the big challenges of climate change and climate justice, let me tell you a story. There is a story told by Lawrence van der Post in his book, The Lost World of the Kalahari. He lived among these indigenous peoples of the Kalahari Desert, and they were astonished when they asked him if he could hear the stars. When he said no, they could not believe it. For them, the stars were alive with sound. They sang into the night. Son, this story is more than memory. It is a truth. Creation speaks and sings. The land, the rivers, the waters, the ocean, the winds, the mountains, all the creatures are all sacred. All are alive. All are our relatives, our kin, and all proclaim the voice of the Creator. Most importantly, this story reminds us all, sadly, how far the distance is between us and creation as relative and kin, and how deaf and alienated we are from listening to our Earth Mother. And so I remind you again of these words that has guided me and your ancestors. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth. This is not advice, it is a charge. For to remember your Creator is to stand in reverence, to know the sacredness of all life, and to walk with ears attuned to the spirit and songs of the earth. Hassan, my great-grandson, remember, caring for country is caring for life. Let me tell you another story from my own youth. When I began high school, I was asked to write an essay on trees. Well, I did not know what an essay was, let alone how to write an essay. So I asked my father for help. Well, he wrote the essay for me, and in that essay he used two of the biggest words I had ever seen. These words were kaleidoscope, bewilderment. Now, these two big words helped me understand my responsibility as a young First Nations person, because In that essay, my father gave me the greatest description of trees I have ever seen or heard. He called them a kaleidoscope bewilderment. It was his way of charging me with my personal responsibility, that is, to stand up and speak out for climate justice, which includes protecting our beautiful trees. These two words sank deep into my heart, and I've carried them ever since. Kaleidoscope bewilderment. They have become my guide and compass for seeing, for listening, for protecting and for speaking out, because the whole of creation, the rivers, the oceans, the mountains, the stars, the forests, the trees, and all the living creatures, is indeed a kaleidoscope of wonder and mystery, bewildering and mystical and beautiful. So, Asan, my great-great-grandson, remember, caring for country is caring for life. I have also included 2 fused photographs in this letter to help you put things into perspective. One photograph is of you in your pram looking at a photograph of our big, beautiful Mother Earth. The other photograph is of you looking out from your pram at another photograph taken in the year 1990 from a satellite some 4 billion miles away from Earth, from outer space. It's called the little blue dot. This little blue dot is also our beautiful Mother Earth. And on that little blue dot, all of us humans live out all of our dreams and aspirations, all of our ideals and ideas, all of our wars and battles that we commit against each other and our neighbours. All of our actions, good and bad, are lived out daily on that little blue dot. This is your address. This is where you live. Yes, climate change seems like a big problem on such a little blue dot. But I must speak plainly. This year, you are celebrating your very first birthday on this little blue dot. And as we celebrate your birthday in this present time, right now, sadly, the earth groans, the oceans rise, the rivers run dry, the forests burn, the ice caps melt, our islands are drowning. We fight and kill our neighbours. Floods are destroying homes and lands and oceans, and many creatures, big and small, just vanish. Hassan, my great-grandson, climate change is real, and climate justice cannot be delayed. It demands more than sympathy. As our old people told us, when the land is sick, the people are sick. And so climate justice demands human rights, land rights, ocean rights, water rights, and truth-telling. It demands recognition that the land, seas, and all humankind, along with all creatures, have a right to exist as our relatives. It demands strong laws, not words only, but strong laws that protect what is sacred. And so I lay this charge upon you, as my father did to me, my great-grandson. Guard the land, for she is your mother. Guard the waters, for they are your lifeblood. Guard the oceans, for they are your pathway and shield. Guard the creatures, for they are your relations. Guard the stars, for they are your song. Guard your neighbours, because we all live and exist together on this little blue dot we call our home. When you come of age and stand in the strength of your youth, you must choose. Will you walk the easy road of silence, or will you lift your voice for justice? Will you ignore the song of the stars, or will you join the great chorus of creation, crying out for justice and healing? So I charge you, Hassan, my great-great-grandson, remember your Creator, honour your relations, defend the earth with courage, carry the words of kaleidoscope bewilderment in your heart, and let it guide your eyes and ears and your mind. Let it be a compass, for creation is not given to you to use and destroy. It is entrusted to you to protect and preserve for future generations. Sun, the stars are singing, the rivers are calling, the forests and mountains are waiting. May your life be an answer to their cry. Hassan, I love you so much. So I write this letter with urgency, with my deepest love and hope for you and all of humanity. Be strong and of good courage, and I will always remain your loving great-great-grandfather. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Uncle Ray, for that incredibly personal reflection. And I would love if we can invite Hassan here in maybe 15 years' time to write his response. Next up, we have Dr. Erin O'Donnell. Erin is a senior lecturer and ARC research fellow at the University of Tasmania. And she has over 20 years of experience in water law and policy and is recognised internationally for her research into the legal rights for rivers and Indigenous rights to water. I'll hand over to you, Erin.
Thank you so much. And Uncle Ray, thank you. Like another round of applause, folks. That was incredible. I'm going to pick up some of the themes that Uncle Ray introduced for us. Before I do, I'll also just acknowledge country that's holding all of us here today, country that's keeping us safe, and country that remains unceded. We're here on Ngunnawal country. Australia, by and large, has never fully acknowledged what it means for Aboriginal sovereignty to remain. And I'm going to be picking up the themes of Uncle Ray's beautiful letter, but through the lens of settler state law. And I'm going to use that phrase quite specifically. So I'm a legal scholar, I work with the law, and there is a temptation in Australia to call it the law. This is a legally pluralist place. Everywhere, every single place in Australia, you are on Indigenous lands, you are swimming in Indigenous waters, you are looking up at Indigenous skies. Those are the words of Amberlyn Kwamuliner, a Palaku poet and scholar. And that means that you are also always within Indigenous legal frameworks. So that is something that we also need to grapple with when we think about the role of law in protecting well-being and promoting our relationship with the world around us. And settler law, honestly, has done a pretty shit job, right? Settler colonial framings of the environment treat the environment as a resource. We make it into a legal object over which human beings, and by that we mean settler human beings, have total dominion. And then occasionally we're like, well, maybe we should curb our own behaviour just a smidgen because it starts to be inconvenient to us. But the law as a whole continues to construct the environment as a resource for us to use. When we think about the alternatives that we can create, Indigenous peoples have been offering those alternatives for millennia. And I'm going to quote from, or at least paraphrase, from Mary Graham, an Indigenous philosopher, a Combinberry person from Queensland. And she defines humanity, the essence of what makes us human, is first our relationship with land, and second, our relationship with each other. So relationships are what define us as human, and our responsibility to give effect to that relationship with country, with lands and waters, is essential to our humanness. And that plays into our well-being, of course, as well. And I know Liam's going to follow up with some more detail about the specific data on how we know that well-being is connected. A better environment means a better outcome for all of us. But what can law do, right? Settler state environmental law, Western colonial environmental legal frameworks have been really letting us down. There has been, over the last 20 years, a significant challenge to those frameworks, one that recognises nature itself as a rights holder. There are now 495 rights of nature initiatives around the world. This is the fastest growing legal field anywhere in the world. Rights of nature is not a fringe piece of environmental law anymore. It is central, it is constitutional law reform, it is local law reform, it is statutory law reform. 495 examples around the world. So this is an idea whose time has come. But what does it mean when we expand the community of rights holders to encompass nature? There's a risk here, right? When you set up another entity that has legal rights and powers, some people see it then as another fighter in the ring. You've got another competitor for scarce resources. We see that play out particularly in the United States. So in 2019, Lake Erie was recognised as the holder of rights. The very day after that came into effect, a farming corporation sued and challenged the constitutionality of that law because they were so afraid that they were going to be sued for any part they may have played, I'm being very careful in my language here, in potentially adding to the pollution burden felt by Lake Erie. And that law was struck down on the basis of that challenge. So people react with fear to the idea that nature might now be able to push back. But what's the reality that happens when we acknowledge that relationship with the natural world? We don't actually have to be afraid of a new fighter in the ring if we stop seeing individuals as adversarial entities, always fighting, always competing. We recognise that actually we are in an interdependent relationship. Humans do not exist. If we go back to Mary Graham's definition of humanity, we do not exist as humans without our relationship with the world around us. And that's now being recognised in the rights of nature space as well. So in 2016, the Constitutional Court of Colombia recognised the Atrato River as a rights holder. And in doing so, they said the constitutional basis on which we are able to recognise the rights of this river are because there are particular constitutional rights held by the Indigenous communities and other local people who live with this river. And they said the best way, the most effective way to protect those people's existing rights is to recognise the biocultural rights of the river. So the framing is one of interdependence, of mutual obligation, of care going in both directions and reliance going in both directions. Our well-being is contingent on our care for the world around us, and our legal frameworks are starting to reflect that. And if we come back to Australia, before I wrap up, there is one example of this actually happening here in Australia. The Behavioural, the river that flows through the heart of Melbourne, known to settler people as the Yarra River, was recognised in 2017 as a single living natural entity. The river and its lands are recognised in law as a living being. That legislation, prosaically called in English the Yarra River Protection Act, has a Wurundjeri Woiwurrung name. And the name in Woiwurrung language is Willipjin Birrarung Muron. And that translates to keep Birrarung alive. It is an absolute call to action. So instead of a protection that might happen, that someone might do at some point, the Indigenous name says you are all responsible. So you all need to step in and protect the river. Under this legislation, there is now a new 10-year strategic plan to give effect to a 50-year community vision for the river. And the name of the plan in Woiwurrung language is Burndap Birrarung Burndapu Maku. And that means what is good for Birrarung is good for us all. So again, it's that full circle recognition that our well-being depends on maintaining good relations with the world around us. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Erin. And it's very easy to get pessimistic in this space, I think, but hearing that the rights of nature is the fastest growing legal area in the world, I think that gives me a little bit of hope. So yeah, thank you for that. Hopeful note about where we're headed. Last off, we have Professor Liam Smith, who's the director and co-founder of Behavioural Australia at Monash University, and is one of Australia's leading authorities on behaviour change. And in 2011, Liam was invited to establish this initiative. So I'll hand over to you, Liam.
Thanks, Kate. I'd also like to start by acknowledging Ngunnawal country. I grew up on Ngunnawal country, actually, and it's nice to come home to this place where I spent so much of my childhood in among the rivers, and particularly great to follow two incredible speakers, although very hard acts to follow, unfortunately. But I pay respects to elders past and present here, and in many ways, much of what I'm going to talk about is really just showing how me and others, I guess, who are in Western scientists, if you like, are catching up to Indigenous ways of knowing for such a long time. So there's really 3 points I want to cover off on in some opening statements to make, and then we can have a discussion. The first is really that nature is good for us. I mean, we heard Uncle Ray say, you know, country will heal all. If we heal country, country will heal all of us. And caring for country is caring for life. And I think those intricate links between the health of our environment and the nature around us is inextricably linked to our own well-being. A researcher by the name of Roger Ulrich, who was an American, currently at Texas A&M, but is an architect, in 1984 published a paper which was called "A View from the Window May Influence Recovery from Surgery." A view from the window may influence recovery from surgery. And what he'd noticed, because he had spent a lot of time in hospitals as a child, a lot of kidney infections and similar, and several months at a time, was that he felt better when he had a view. And that this led to some research that then was published in this paper in Science that has spawned numerous bodies of research from it, Western research from it, that has showed almost universally the benefits of exposure to nature. And I was doing some research in preparation to this, and there were so many just benefits of nature that I had to write them down, so forgive me, I'll go to my notes. But reduced stress and anxiety, improved mood, enhanced attention and focus, greater life satisfaction and happiness. All happen with greater time in natural settings, with nature views, and indeed even things like indoor plants. I was happy to see we had some in this room. So there's psychological benefits. Physical benefits, we have better cardiovascular health, improved immune function. It encourages physical activity, of course. We sleep better, and as we heard, we recover better from surgery. And of course, there are social and community benefits. We have stronger senses of belonging, we have reduced feelings of loneliness, and we do more pro-social behaviour. And as I said, I think our Indigenous friends have known this for a very long time, but it also, particularly since Roger Ulrich's paper in '94, it shows up everywhere. It's almost a truism now that exposure to nature will lead to good outcomes. So much so that some countries have experimented with green scripts and the like, where the doctor says, go for a walk. That's what you need to do to feel better. So I guess there's this body of 40 years of academic Western research that's really shown what we've known for a long time, and what Indigenous and First Nations cultures have known for a long time. But during that same period, we've seen more urbanisation than we've ever seen in the world. I think currently the number is 56% of the world's population lives in cities. That's expected to go to 68% by 2050. But Australia is particularly urbanised. Australia has between 86 and 90% of people live in urban centres. So we're getting less exposure, if you like, depending, of course, how you define nature. And relatedly, we're also much more dependent, and dependent is probably the wrong word. We use our screens a lot more. So we focus a lot more, and we have a screen-based culture. I'm sure many people in this room, and I do too, spend a lot of time on our phones and on our laptops. And so these things are really, despite all these incredible benefits we know, at the same time we're detaching ourselves from the things that give us incredible benefits, and we see nature as other. And there's some really great work done by some researchers. Many of you will know Richard Louv, who published about nature deficit disorder. I really particularly love Louise Chawla's work, where she studied, I think it was about 20 or 25 people that became very strong advocates, including First Nations people, for environmental issues. She said, what did they have in common? What is it that links those 25 odd people that made them the people they became? And it was one common thread. It was time in nature as kids. It didn't matter actually what kind of time that was, but it was almost quantity over quality. So we really lose a lot of that, or a lot of us live in where we see nature as the other. We go to nature rather than we see ourselves as part of it, and that's sort of the problem. So I guess I'm thinking about some rays of hope, I guess, in terms of what we might do differently given this background, which leads me, I think, to my third point, which is there are ways that we can care more for nature, and that we can do better and reap the benefits of nature, that we can get those mutual symbiotic relationship that we heard from both Erin and Ray. People can have epiphanies. I think they're pretty rare. But greening cities and urban greening is actually really important, and spending and taking time in urban environments can be really helpful. Unfortunately, it disproportionately affects the disadvantaged. We published a paper not that long ago that showed that when Melbourne had our 5K radius, was the people of most disadvantaged that didn't have access to green space during that time. So they couldn't get the benefits that others were getting. So urban greening is important. So is stopping and taking the time to smell the flowers. That sounds like a real, I don't know, glib, I guess, in some ways, but it is really true that when you notice and participate in nature, we can get the benefits even in urban settings. We've obviously, and that can then lead to things like pro-environmental attitudes and pro-environmental behaviours. So this cycle that we heard about from Ray and Erin, particularly Ray talking about this cycle of I care for nature, it cares for me, we know it works, and it can, I believe, be done in urban settings. The one other provocation I'd probably throw out there before I hand back is that we know that some of the effects and the benefits I spoke about at the start can also come from screens. So exposure to nature via screens can also benefit us. Now, the effect is weakened. The evidence is very clear. It's not as strong as the real thing, but it's like a mini dose. And I think there are ways we can explore how do we weave more into our screen tech, whether that's, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but that may be another way to think about how do we get these mutual benefits. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Liam. So please do send in questions on Slido, and happy to also take questions from the floor as well. Before we do that, I just wanted to throw a question to each of you. So in terms of what can we do? What structural barriers are in place that prevent us from valuing nature, from engaging with nature, from connecting with nature? And how has colonisation influenced these barriers? So I know Uncle Ray talked about, we care for country and country cares for us. That's been lost through colonisation. Erin, you talked about the fact that we need legislation to protect the rights of nature because we're not doing it implicitly. Liam, you talked about the known benefits that intuitively we all know that nature's good for us, but we're not really getting out there. So what are those barriers and what can we do to overcome them? Who'd like to go first?
I always have thoughts. I guess my response to that question would actually be maybe I'm going to throw a question to the audience and let's just maybe see a show of hands. Who would say that you have a relationship with a river or a mountain or a park near you? Fantastic, right? So defining it in those terms, I think, is actually the place where we can begin. Because for me, like the Behavioural legislation is a fantastic piece of legislation, but I do wonder whether if the Victorian government had known quite how transformative it was or could be, whether they would have felt brave enough to do it. So one of the things that I think we can do to start moving the needle on this is to re-articulate what it means to have a connection with nature, to frame it as a relationship with kin, with family, to think about the fact that we love our river or our mountain or our park. We love it regardless of how well it happens to be at that point in time. You don't reject a family member just because they're sick, and it's the same with rivers. So I experience time with Behavioural almost on a daily basis, and Behavioural is a very sick river. But when you can get people to the point of admitting that they love it anyway, then that helps build momentum for change, for reform, to how do we show care for this river. We've admitted we loved it, we acknowledge we're in a relationship with this living being. How do we then step that forward? So I think that's the sort of mental shift that I'm trying to get people to take as part of my work.
Yeah, law is so important in this discussion. One of my favourite countries on the planet is a little country in South America called Costa Rica. And what they did in 1948 was include in their constitution, I think it's Article 12 or 10, these 8 words. The military or the army as a permanent institution is abolished. 8 words. Yet those 8 words help to transform their environment and help them to transform the ways in which the money that they would have got for their military, they now spent on their environment and upon social development of their people. And I think today, Erin, you told us that even if you go into Costa Rica, they put a tax on you to go in there because the only people who want to invade Costa Rica are tourists who want to experience nature. Now, can you imagine here in Australia, we don't have anything in our constitution that actually reflects our constitutional rights or laws that protect our environment. There's nothing in there. So if you want to do something truly radical for this country, let's go for a referendum to change the constitution to include the protection of our environment in the constitution, because that's the highest law in the land, and that would then help us to make sure that we protect our rivers and our waters and our oceans and all the other things that need protection. So that kind of radical action is needed right now, that we have to change. We don't want, yes, we need legislation, but I think we need something a lot stronger than that. We need it in our constitution.
Perhaps I can build a little bit on that. So I'm a behavioural scientist, and we're often criticised by system thinkers or transitions thinkers about the fact that we tinker around the edges. We do small things that, make systems run efficiently rather than try and actually drive a whole systemic change. And that's a fair criticism in many ways, and we've really embraced that over the past probably 10 or 15 years. So it's really led us to think differently about, how do we do our trade of behavioural science in a way that actually helps drive more systemic change? And I think there's a few answers to that question. One is there are particular behaviours of audiences we need to study, and I think particularly they are decision makers and people in large organisations who make decisions. We ought to understand their behaviour and work out how do they make decisions and how can we try and influence them. We need to think about particular behaviours, and for me there are 2 that are really important. One is consumption. What we choose to buy and purchase can drive changes in markets, and we've seen that to some cases. And of course advocacy. So if we can get to advocacy where we vote differently, where we lobby differently, where we direct our philanthropic funding or our donation funding to different directions, and we protest even on the street, those things to me are behaviours of interest that can help drive systemic change. And I really think we're leaning much more into that. There's a body of research around what we call spillover, which is really this idea about if you do one behaviour, can it lead to another, can it lead to another, can it lead to another? And then what are the mechanisms for that happening? And I can see pathways of spillover that start with someone appreciating their local park, like Erin asked, but ultimately leading to changing how you invest your superannuation and voting for a different political party. And I think that's where behavioural science can help get to the point that you're advocating for as well, Uncle Ray.
Just one thing to kind of draw all of this together as well, because part of the framing of the question was colonisation. And I did just want to draw your attention to what's happening in Victoria right now, which is the passage of legislation to recognise Australia's very first official treaty between the settler state and Indigenous peoples. Now that's 250 years too late, but it is a way of resetting the foundations, and they're being strategic. This is not going to upend law and order in Victoria. It's not costing amazing amounts of money, but it is a very genuine effort led by Indigenous peoples in Victoria to reset the relationship between the settler state and Indigenous peoples, to acknowledge the political and legal reality of their existence as nations. And I think that needs to be part of whatever we do going forward as well. It is the way to address the harm that the lie of colonisation is still telling us every day. The fact that we can sit here without a treaty with Indigenous peoples in most parts of Australia is hurting all of us, and it's hurting the world that we live in.
And we have to do something. I mean, if you look at the fossil fuel industry, scientific evidence will show you that because of the ways in which we're mining in this country with coal and all the other things that we're mining, that's causing the oceans, particularly the Pacific oceans, to rise. So I think it's risen about 9 inches so far. And so islands like Kiribati and Kiribati will be no longer, or Tonga, their water will be, is already going. And also up in the Torres Straits, our people up there are seeing their loved ones floating out to sea in their coffins. So we know that the issues are real, and I know, let me give you an example of the power that we're facing and the control. When I was at COP26 or whatever it was in what's the place called? Scotland. We all went there believing that we could get a decision that we could phase out coal. That was one of the things that we aimed for, and we did it. But the night it came for the vote to take place, 2 countries went up to the president and says, I can't vote on this particular article, Article 20, I think it was, because they wanted to change the language. And so they changed the language from phase out to phase down. And this is the power that we're fighting against. And so we have to protect our own nations and our own domestic issues here in our own country and not rely upon the UN or these other external agencies to give us some ways of protecting our environment. I mean, I go to these COPs and I come back worse emotionally than when I went because of the ways in which Indigenous peoples are treated in this. So take notice of that. I mean, the issue now is they want to transition away from coal. See, language is power, and language is control as well. So just be careful, be very conscious of the ways in which even external agencies like the UN and the 190-odd nations make decisions that affect you. This is your planet. This is your little blue dot. And you have a responsibility to stand up and say, hey, hang on a sec.
Thank you, everyone, for those reflections. And going to Liam's point about behaviour change, some research we've been doing at the University of Tasmania shows that people who are connected with nature, I can't remember the exact figure, are about 80 times more likely to engage in conservation activism than those who aren't. So it just shows that engagement, that connection is so crucial and important. We have a really interesting question from Slido. So someone has asked, we struggle to use the word racism in this country when it comes to people, let alone nature. How can we start to articulate the impact of racism on nature?
Just stand up and be counted. I think there is another form of racism that we could take. Positive racism, if it's ever, there is one part of our community that needs to be addressed radically here, and that's our military. All militaries are the highest users of fossil fuels. They need the fossil fuels to do the wars. But also, on the other hand, it's these makers of all of this weapons. I mean, they can just shoot you. Now, I don't make those weapons. I'd rather use a spear or the fist or a stone. But now we've got weapons that can take out your children. But I don't hear a protest against that at one level, but also the military is the biggest, not only users, but also they're the ones who destroy a lot of our environment. But we don't stand up. Maybe we're too scared of the military.
I just want to speak to the issue of racism and nature. And I think there are 2 dimensions to that. One is the idea of who gets to be in nature. And there's a lot of work coming out of the US that shows that if you are black and in nature, you are far more likely to be targeted and hounded out of a park or out of, targeted by landowners for being on public land that might be adjacent to the land. You'll be treated with more suspicion if you have brown skin than if you have white skin. Birding communities across the world remain largely white. The people who go out and look at birds in nature tend to be white people. Like, there's a gender dimension here as well. But the way that nature is accessible to people of colour is an issue. So racism is imposing barriers between people, and it goes to Liam's point about disadvantage as well. People who are disconnected from nature are those who tend to be socioeconomically disadvantaged, and they will also more likely be people of colour. So because of those intersecting forms of disadvantage. So I think that is one intersection point that we need to get better at talking about. And black people, brown people are out there talking about it. So go and read their work, go and find their blogs, go and follow someone on Instagram that is talking about what it feels like to be out there in nature as a person of colour, because they are telling that story. I don't need to speak for them, they're already doing it. The other point that I think is really interesting and problematic when it comes to nature and race is actually the colonial definition of what nature is, right? Like, who's heard of green colonialism? Right, yeah, like one or two people. Okay, so this is the idea that nature is wilderness, and wilderness by definition is not people. So our entire history of national parks, of protection of wild places, is predicated on the idea that people are therefore not part of those places. Now think about what that means here in Australia. Every single land and waterscape that you are passing through in Australia, that you see from your plane or that you experience in a national park, every single landscape has been curated by people for over 65,000 years. You are witnessing and experiencing a landscape that people have been part of creating. Now, we've been shutting people out for the last 250, but that was the origin of the lands that you're experiencing. So when we protect wilderness places in the absence of people, we are reinforcing the separation of Indigenous people from country, and we are also injuring ourselves by saying nature is other. It's not in our urban spaces, it's not in our homes, it's not a place and a thing that which we are part of and to whom we are connected. So I think colonialism as a distinct force to racism also has a significant impact on the way that we interact with the world around us.
We have, so talking about that importance, I guess, of humans caring for country, we have an interesting question that kind of poses the opposite spectrum, which is sometimes humans' love of nature can lead us to harm it unintentionally. So the overuse of national parks and so forth. So how do we marry up that importance of connecting with nature and caring for country and nature, but also the fact that that love and that care may unintentionally harm it?
I mean, again, I have lots of thoughts. I think this is a really interesting question, because I think sometimes we need to look really closely at the evidence. So a few years ago, when I first went to the United States and I visited some of their really big parks, I was blown away when I went to Yosemite, which is one of the most popular national parks in the world. And certainly if you're on the main loop through the park, it seems extraordinary to me the number of people that just kind of get in the car and drive through it, and you get traffic jams through the park. But that was also all they wanted to do. So there were parts of the park that were incredibly accessible, like the Yosemite Falls Walk is designed so that if you're in a wheelchair, you can go there. If there are lots of people, you can go there. But then as soon as you step away from those places, it was like you were alone in the park. Like, I was astonished at how quickly I could feel alone in that environment, even though there were tens of thousands of people moving through that park on a daily basis. So yeah, I think part of it is let's interrogate the evidence and let's find out where people are actually going in a park environment, and if we make it more accessible and easier for people, is it actually leading to degradation in other parts of the environment? But then I think the second part of that question is, if you are in relation with country, with the places that you are visiting, can you feel gratitude for what they are giving you? And I think when we start to identify that and feel that gratitude, then we start saying, well, how do we give back? How do I become reciprocal in this relationship? And so that is the framing that we need to bring to the kinds of activities that we do in these places. We often think of recreation as a real entitlement, and I think we need to think about it in terms of reciprocity.
Early in my career, I did a lot of work with zoos. I was interested in what effect having an experience with a lion or a giraffe or something had on people, and what difference it made. And it quickly led to me thinking about the morals that accompany zoos and some of the debates that happen around essentially incarcerating animals in very limited and not very pro-welfare conditions. And I sort of reconciled that in my own mind, that they were like ambassadors. They did a job that meant they could reach and through interpretation of various sorts, they could tell stories and connect people with nature. In fact, in Victoria, around 2.5 million people with nature, that other places couldn't. They could do things that others couldn't. It's a very uncomfortable discussion in many ways, because there are individuals that are, and I think the same goes to these parks. There are parks that, yes, you might need to put concrete paths in because we want to give as much access as possible. And that may really be quite confronting to, say, Indigenous peoples of that land. The behaviourist in me says getting people into nature is good. Getting people to connect with nature is good. It comes at a cost sometimes, but probably the benefits outweigh the cost.
And I encourage you to read the Paris Agreement, particularly Article 6 about carbon protection and how we do that. Us as Indigenous peoples, we're really having a battle in the ways in which the powerful states have a voice on this, and we don't get too much credit for that. And so we're looking at Australia. But if you wanted to look at law again, for me, okay, I'm just talking personally, I had a look at England. Now, it's only a little country, yet they can protect their environment. And I just scratch my head on that one, because if I went over there and started digging into Sherwood Forest, I know I'd get arrested and put in jail and probably get my head cut off. But these people can come over into my country and dig as many holes as they want. And even in the law, in Queensland, for example, the land is called wasteland. It's still in the Constitution. So wasteland means that no one lives there. Terra nullius was the term that they used when they came here. Nobody lives here, therefore it's an empty land. We can do what we want. And I still feel, myself as an Indigenous, that that's the way in which the law is looked upon when it approaches the environment here in Australia, that it is a wasteland and it is still terra nullius. If it wasn't, we might have got the voice referendum through in 2023. But that particular discussion helped us to understand very clearly the levels of racism, but also that they wanted to protect the land and use it for their own use rather than for the use of everybody.
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions on Slido, but I just wanted to throw to the room to see if there were any questions from the floor. We'll just get a microphone to you. Thanks, Liam.
Yeah, thank you. This was in regards to the NDIS 2013 to 2024 Back on Track Act, and I was with Darren, who's an Indigenous brother, and it quotes here, and we provided sub-clauses and provisions to the Act, and it quotes, individual, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders cultures have specific spiritualities and law, L-O-R-E, not, and therefore obligations, responsibilities that are connected to country, community, there's just one more section. B, this connection to country, law, L-O-R-E, and spirituality is a way of understanding life, identify and connection with others of kinship. Thank you.
Any reflections on that comment? Cool. Okay, thank you. I think I see. So, Joe?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is, I guess, to Pastor Ray and to Erin. Pastor Ray, when you mentioned a referendum, 100% with you, but my heart sank. And I just keep thinking, how are we ever going to get any referendum passed in this country when it is legal for our political leaders to spread disinformation? And how do we win that battle? And so I guess that's where I'm looking to you, Erin, as the law expert. I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
I think that's a question for the non-Indigenous population, not for us Indigenous. We've always advocated for our seat at the table, our voice, not just in these forums here, but also internationally. And we do have now the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It hasn't been enshrined here in this in this world. Monash University did one of the most best exercises in analysing Australia's fitting into the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 of those. And so it's just making sure the frameworks that we already employed has to be recognised for their worth within the whole of the country. And for me, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is not only for us, it's for all of us. And welcome to country, it's for all of us.
I completely agree. I mean, we do need to get better at talking about these things and having these conversations all the time. And I think picking up on something that Sharon said this morning that really stuck with me is kind of, get over ourselves, right? Like, as white people, we need to be out there talking about it and using the language that says we understand we're living in a settler colony, we understand what that means. In terms of law reform, like, my gosh, yeah, it's so challenging. And I think paying attention to the mechanisms by which laws get made and the barriers that they create, like the ability of politicians to spread disinformation, that also pinpoints places we need to target with law reform that might eventually start to create an enabling environment for the big issues. It's a little bit of a tangent, I suppose, to that, but one of the most hopeful studies that I read this year was talking about how, like, they've mapped over time, the population of Australians within electorates is increasing exponentially. So the average MP is now representing far more people, I wish I had the numbers off the top of my head, than they used to. And that makes it more difficult for any of us to hold our elected representatives to account, because they know that if they hear from one person, it's only one of 200,000. So it's much easier for them to pay more attention to people with deep pockets. It's much easier for them to pay more attention to the lobbyists and the mining corporations and the people who are funding them. So, like, a really exciting structural reform that we could actually start to agitate for would be to increase the number of MPs. I feel like people in Australia tend to be like, oh my God, what do MPs even do for us anyway? And increasing the number of people in Parliament seems a little odd when they're not perhaps doing a great job. But I mean, we had Sophie Scomps in here, right? Like, there are so many people who could be doing extraordinary things. Increasing the number of people, which means increasing the accountability to us as electors, that could actually be a game changer. I would love to see that get some carriage at a national level.
Thanks, Uncle Ray and Erin. We're just about out of time. I just wanted to throw to see if any of you had any final comments you'd like to make before we wrap up.
Just get radical. Just get radical.
I'm going to follow that with a completely not radical thing. But this is a conversation I feel like I've been having with a lot of people lately, and it's the theme that's come up a lot in this conference. We get stuck in a language of trade-offs, right? We trade off environmental outcomes versus economic outcomes versus health outcomes and social outcomes and cultural outcomes. And we get stuck in that language where we think that if we've got a big enough gain on one thing, it offsets a significant loss on another. An idea that's coming out of Wanganui, led by Wanganui iwi over in Aotearoa, New Zealand, when they are working with community to try and think about how development happens with their living river, is the idea of abundance for everyone. So abundance for everyone means that, you can't have just a handful of people in luxury. And abundance for everyone means abundance for the living river as well. And what that does is says, instead of trade-offs, we're now in an optimization solution space where we actually set boundaries around what is an acceptable solution. We've got to have abundance for everyone, including the world we live in. And that is a really different way of solving our collective problems.
I'd just say, I was looking outside and I was thinking there's some wonderful native grasses and trees. In your breaks, get out there and have a conversation in there rather than in here. That's the behaviourist in me speaking. I know it will do you good. Even if your conversation's about other things, if you do it in nature, it will do good for you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Uncle Ray, Erin and Liam, and please join me in thanking our amazing panel.